Imagine that you leave school and dedicate yourself to the art of writing. Despite winning many awards, everyone thinks your works are very boring, so your parents send you to an island where you meet a little girl who, along with the rest of her town, will teach you how beautiful life is. Seisha Handa, a calligrapher, was criticized at the Saika Award. Calligraphy captures emotion. However, during the Saika Awards ceremony, his work was harshly criticized by a judge who called him conformist and mediocre in front of a crowd. Japanese calligraphy isn't just about writing characters. It's about capturing the essence and beauty of each stroke, reflecting the personality and emotions of the calligrapher. Unable to contain his fury, Handa reacts in the worst way possible and, during one of the art competitions, he hits the judge in the face with his shoe. Because of this outburst of anger, the protagonist is unofficially banished to a remote island to cool his head and reflect on his actions and hope that things at home calm down. Arriving on the island, he faces a new reality. Buses are distant, and he accepts a local's help to reach Nanatsutape by carriage. Without this help, he'd walk half a day from the airport. Handa, angry, ignores the beauty around him despite the man's efforts. The moving crew is at his new house, but won't move furniture inside, leaving items outside until he does. At the house, the mayor greets and helps him eagerly. Two high school girls appear, trying to sneak away unseen. The moving crew is already waiting for him at his new house, but according to the foreman, they don't handle bringing the furniture inside, so his belongings are left outside, at least until he feels like bringing everything in. Once at the house where he'll be living, Handa is greeted by the mayor, who helps him enthusiastically, and two high school girls also appear, hiding and trying to sneak away without being seen. For Handa, the house is a mess, filled with trash, strange talismans, and lacking the modern comforts he was expecting. To make matters worse, instead of finding a glass, he discovers a latrine and will have to learn how to use a water heater to take a shower. While exploring the house, determined to endure these conditions to improve his calligraphy, he discovers something even more disturbing: a little girl hiding in one of the rooms. The mayor explains that the girl's name is Nero, and she's the troublemaker of the village, who has made the house her base, even though they've repeatedly asked her to leave. Nero asks the mayor if the main character is a model from a magazine, since she thinks he looks handsome, but the mayor tells her that's not the case, he's just a calligraphy teacher. Overwhelmed by the situation, Handa kicks Nero out of the house and, frustrated, also tells the mayor to leave. Then he starts cleaning up the mess that Nero left and unpacking his things, getting ready to start his work. However, his peace doesn't last long. As he concentrates on his calligraphy, Nero reappears and ruins his first stroke. Even though Handa kicks her out again, the hurtful words he received at the awards ceremony keep swirling in his mind, making it hard for him to concentrate. After his angry outburst, the main character is seen as pretentious and isolated. His writing reflects this. Returning to work, he finds Nero and the mayor in his house again and kicks them out. Handa continues working while Nero reads beside him. When he tries to get back to work, he discovers that Nero and the mayor have invaded his house again, forcing him to kick them out once more. Finally, Handa resigns himself and decides to keep working while Nero, now calmer, reads beside him. The girl tells him that his calligraphy is really good, comparing it to that of her school teacher. This triggers painful memories in Handa, who insults Nero and leaves, frustrated and confused. However, while reflecting by the sea, he feels guilty for having treated the girl poorly and remembers why his father sent him to the island to cool his head and become a better person. The main character remembers the conversation with his friend and agent, who tells him that he should apologize and accept that he was the one who reacted poorly to a bad review. But he insists that he won't do it because he believes he's right, even if no one understands him. Nero finds him and, in a surprisingly mature gesture, apologizes and returns the papers she used to imitate his calligraphy. Handa also apologizes and acknowledges that he has been trying hard. The two go out for a walk, and Nero tells him that it was easy to copy his calligraphy since it's pretty simple, which makes the main character throw her into the ocean. He also explains that the reason they're simple is that they're practice designs meant to be tossed away, but Nero interrupts him and throws him into the water too. They swim to the shore, watch the sunset, and it affects our main character more. Returning home, Handa learns Meryl is the granddaughter of the man who gave him a ride. Neighbors help him, and their kindness moves him. Over time, Handa adapts to island life, inspired by accepting people. He also meets all his neighbors who have come to help him organize his things, and this act of kindness moves our main character, making him realize that his exile could be the key to improving not just his calligraphy, but also his heart. Over time, Handa starts to adapt to life on the island, surrounded by people who accept him and inspire him to be better. In the end, Handa calls his friend Kawafuji and asks him to apologize on his behalf to the judge, acknowledging that even though he's not ready to do it himself, he knows he has to take responsibility for all his actions. His whole experience has inspired him to create a new piece of art called Fun. Hiroshi, the mayor's son, is caught in an internal struggle because despite his hard work, his school results aren't what he expected, and he can't seem to stand out in any subject. His parents try to comfort him, assuring him that it's not the end of the world, and they asked him to take a plate of homemade food to Handa, the calligrapher who recently moved to the island. Even though Hiroshi finds it strange that his mom is cooking for a stranger, he agrees, but not before expressing his intention to set some boundaries with this new resident. However, his mother scolds him and gives him a nudge, reminding him that she likes to take care of others since she feels her family doesn't need her as much as before. But the way she says it is a bit overly dramatic, so her son ends up accepting it. Meanwhile, Handa has been on the island for a week without having managed to create a work that satisfies him, except for a flash of inspiration during his first night, which is not that great either, so it is time to work without distractions. However, little Meru, with her endless energy, visits him every day to annoy him, until one day she introduces him to her friends Miwa and Tama, two high school girls. Miwa and Tama are outraged because Handa's house used to be their secret base, and they have no intention of giving it up even if Handa is living there. Handa also discovers that it's the girls who will teach Neru double entendre and adult words, so he scolds them, telling them to be careful about what they say in front of the girls since she repeats everything without knowing. The girls check out the main character's calligraphy, and Tama, who aspires to be a mangaka, insults Handa by writing loser in calligraphy, trying to make her point. But Handa, with his superior skill, hits back by writing loser in flawless calligraphy, leaving the girls impressed. This unexpected calligraphy duel changes the dynamic, and Miwa and Tama decide that after finishing their summer assignment on calligraphy, they'll ask Handa to correct their work. Feeling finally appreciated, Handa enthusiastically agrees, but then he regrets it, though it's already too late since the girls have left. When the girls leave, Handa tries to get back to work, but Neru returns with her friend Hina. Although he initially rejects the idea of playing with them, he gives in when he sees Hina crying, allowing them to stay and draw. But as often happens with kids, the situation quickly spirals out of control when Neru spills Handa's ink and accidentally hits him in the face. Sitting there frustrated, Handa kicks them out of the house just as Hiroshi arrives with his mom's food. Hiroshi is determined to set things straight because he really doesn't appreciate his mom feeding a jobless artist for free, who he's sure must be a stuck-up. So, he's going to tell him everything he needs to say. Hiroshi, angry, bursts into the house and finds Handa passed out. Neru explains to him that Handa faints every day at this time because of the sleepless nights he spends dedicated to calligraphy. This discovery shocks Hiroshi, who sees himself reflected in Handa, recognizing that he too lacks natural talent and should try harder, just like Handa. As he looks around a room filled with Handa's calligraphy papers, Hiroshi realizes that his poor performance in school is due to his lack of effort. When Handa wakes up, Hiroshi tells him that even though his mom won't admit it, Handa is becoming a burden for them, and that's why he won't be able to keep bringing him food. So the artist will have to start cooking his own dinner. Days later, Nero finds Handa passed out again and calls an ambulance. At the hospital, they inform him that he suffered a cardiac arrest due to lack of sleep and poor nutrition. The mayor and his wife insist that he needs to take better care of himself, and Nero stays by his side, playing and bothering him as usual. Later, Miwa and Tama visit him after school and panic when they see that his floor has run out and will soon start pumping air. Everyone, including Handa, gets scared, but the situation is quickly resolved when the nurse tells them that those bags don't pump air once they're empty, so there's nothing to worry about. Nero tells a ghost story at the hospital, surprising everyone when Handa admits his fear. Hiroshi brings items but refuses calligraphy tools. At that moment, Hiroshi arrives with some things that Handa had asked for, but he refuses to bring his calligraphy tools, arguing that Handa shouldn't be working after just getting out of the hospital for exhaustion. As everyone leaves, Handa has an unexpected encounter with an old ghost who reminds him that everyone cared about him, which briefly inspires Handa, so he asks the nurse to bring him his tools. However, the woman refuses because she wants him to fully recover. Handa, being a bit pushy, grouts the nurse, demanding his art supply. Later, the nurse informs that Handa has had a spike in fever and needs to rest, although what he actually suffered was a bump on the head, courtesy of the angry nurse. While reviewing the discharge, Handa is accompanied by the mayor, his wife, and Nero. It is then that he discovers that the old man he spoke to was actually a ghost, which plunges him into a new nervous breakdown. Nero is super proud of herself because she started learning to read ahead of schedule, even though that's usually taught in 3rd grade. She's already making progress. The two teenagers, Niwa and Tama, are surprised as they never imagined that Nero would be so dedicated to her studies and suspect that Handa has something to do with her enthusiasm for learning. Handa, for his part, is excited to have sent one of his works to Tokyo to present at the case exhibition and is particularly proud of the work he did just after leaving the hospital. However, when he realizes that he has run out of black ink, he decides to go to the market to buy more. While he's there, he sees a lot of sweets and thinks about buying some for Nero, but he gets distracted by a little accident with a packet of needles, so he has to spend time cleaning everything up to help the elderly vendor. When he finally finds the ink, he realizes that there's only one bottle left, and just at that moment, Tama shows up looking for the same thing. In a gesture of kindness, Handa decides to give the ink to Tama and chooses to use some ground carob for his upcoming projects. Tama, feeling grateful, tells him that she's working on a shonen manga and plans to send it to a publisher. She asks Handa to read it and give her his honest opinion since they both express themselves through ink. Handa, even though he doesn't know much about manga, agrees to help her. But when he opens the manuscript and sees some pretty intense images, he suggests that she focus her story on themes like love and friendship instead of leaning so much into violence. He also points out that the content is too mature for a shonen audience, which is typically between 12 and 18 years old. Tama, however, changes her attitude and passionately explains that what makes a manga interesting isn't a morally good protagonist, but the dark elements like fights, crows, and shattered morals. As she talks, she becomes increasingly intense and dark. After the chat, Tama lends Handa a collection of mangas so he can catch up and give her more informed advice. That same night, Tama regrets showing her true self to Handa, fearing that now the whole town will see her as an otaku or, even worse, as a fujoshi. For those who don't know, fujoshi is a Japanese term used for women who are hardcore fans of BL, boys love, and since Tama is the only otaku in town, it makes her a bit embarrassed. So, the young girl decides to hide her yaoi mangas to avoid being misunderstood by others. Meanwhile, Hiroshi arrives at Handa's house and tells him that at this time of year, the school has calligraphy assignments, so all the boys by ink and make it scarce. Knowing this, she gives him an extra bottle of ink that he was never able to use, which excites our protagonist. Handa, grateful but exhausted, almost faints on Hiroshi, but just then, Tama arrives to hide her manga. However, upon seeing Handa and Hiroshi in a compromising position, she decides to hide, interpreting the scene in the way she likes best. The next day, Handa receives the news that he came in second place in the calligraphy contest he participated in. This news deeply depresses him, and everything around him turns into a cloud of darkness. What brings him down even more is knowing that the first place went to an 18-year-old guy. Handa starts to think that without calligraphy, he is nothing and that he's wasting his time on the island taking care of two teenagers and a girl who keep asking him for favors. Naru, on the other hand, doesn't let Handa's negativity get to her and suggests they do something fun if he's not enjoying himself. As they walk, Handa notices that everyone is carrying plastic bags and asks what's going on. Naru explains that a boat is throwing free machi and everyone is there with their bags to catch as much as they can. There, they run into Miwa, Tama, and Hiroshi, who warn them about two pros at catching machi. Despite his efforts, Handa can't catch any, which leads him to question whether he should give up calligraphy too. At one point, Hiroshi even falls on our main character, which sparks Tama's imagination, and now she sees them as a forbidden couple. One of the professionals gives him some advice, since he is not catching machis because he is always looking out, when the trick is to wait patiently and catch the ones around him. She explains that if he spends all his time just looking out, he'll miss the opportunities that are within his reach. At the end of the day, Handa didn't catch any machi, but when he got back, he found a pot of machi stew that someone left for him as a thank you. He realizes that despite everything, he had a fun day. Inspired by the words of the pro who advised him to be more patient and observant, Handa decides to apply this not only to his calligraphy, but also in finding his own style. Later, he decides to use his computer, but after several failed attempts, he realizes that it won't turn on. This frustrates him because he doubts there's a computer repair shop on the island. Trying to contact Kawafui, he discovers that his phone isn't working either since the time it fell into the sea. Without a computer, phone, or internet, he panics when he realizes that it will be impossible for him to work. After a month on the island, life is busier than Handa expected. He loves visiting a house with 15 cats. Although he loves cats, he never approached them. When he tries, the owners say the cats are strays and don't like humans. Handa attempts to pet one, but gets scratched. Later, his eyes water and his neck turns red. Still, Handa tries to pet one, but he only ends up with a big scratch on his face. After a while with the cats, he starts to feel his eyes watering and his neck getting red. Handa, feeling defeated, concludes that he's allergic to cats, which explains why his parents forbade him from having a pet since he was a kid. Not thinking much of it, he heads to a place with payphones to try to call Kawafuji. There, he doesn't find the owner, but he does find Naru and her friend Aki, who the little girl describes as a video game expert. Handa realizes that Aki is Tama's brother, and after a while, Aki hands Handa a rotary phone, something he didn't expect to see in the 21st century. When he tries to use it, he realizes he doesn't know how, so Aki has to dial for him. Handa asks Kawafuji for a new computer, but Kawafuji suggests a break. Handa should focus on the exhibition. Kawafuji advises relaxing, but Handa insists on project materials, aiming for first prize. Handa gives kids tape. Kawafuji advises Handa to relax. With a September 10th deadline, Handa asks Kawafuji for project material. Despite annoying kids, Handa gives them masking tape. He starts ragging but, lacking inspiration, decides to. Wow. Even though the children around him can be annoying, Handa gives each of them mask glue before returning his focus to his work. Handa tries to write but lacks inspiration and walks. He trips over seaweed, revealing a scarred diver. During his walk, he trips over a box of seaweed, and out comes a diver with a scar running across his whole face, giving him an intimidating look. Upon discovering that Handa is the famous calligrapher, the man, who turns out to be Miwa's father, asks him, more like orders him, to paint 5 characters on his newly bought boat for liquor. Handa tries to start the work, but he realizes that the materials he was given aren't what he's used to, and he's never painted on a curved surface before, only on paper. This is a new challenge for the guy, one he doesn't know if he can handle. He tells the man that he needs to go home to prepare the molds, but the old man gets angry, insisting that he must do it by hand, challenging his professionalism. Just when the tension is rising, Miwa takes her father away before the situation gets worse. But with the pressure from the man and his own pride, Handa decides to accept the challenge so he doesn't ruin the boat and to practice with the brush. Handa uses some wooden boards to get familiar with the wake and the movements. When he finally feels ready, he faces the boat, but soon realizes that he didn't take the curvature of the surface into account. He goes into such a big crisis that even the kids around him start to worry, and Naru, seeing his distress, dips her hands in the paint and leaves her handprint on the boat, encouraging the other kids to give the same. Although Handa initially panics at what the kids have done, Naru's plan works, and with the pressure lifted, Handa is able to focus, and the brush glides smoothly over the surface of the boat. In the end, the old man congratulates him and thanks him for his professionalism, giving him seaweed as a token of appreciation, but in a threatening way. He scolds him for having messed up his boards, which makes our protagonist run away in a panic. After working on the boat, Handa notices that the brush feels lighter when painting on paper. This motivates him to practice more intensely for the calligraphy exhibition that will take place in a month. However, his concentration is interrupted when Nero's grandfather hands him a gigantic plastic bag full of condiment. Handa takes a bite and gets completely hooked on the delicious flavor, so much so that when he tries to practice his calligraphy, he can't think of anything else but the condiment. Condiment is a type of Japanese pickle that's really common in Japanese cuisine. Days later, Handa finds himself in a sort of withdrawal, pacing around his house while anxiously waiting for Nero's grandfather to bring him more condiment. When they finally knock on the door, Handa rushes to answer, desperate for his dose of medicine, but it's just Nero, Tama, and Niwa. Fortunately, Nero brings with her a large bag of yuzu cone from her grandfather, which instantly improves her mood. With a happier Handa, he starts teaching calligraphy to the girls. When he shows them how to make the first basic characters, Miwa expresses her desire to learn something more picturesque, like the calligraphy Handa usually does. However, Handa insists that they need to start with the basics before trying something more advanced. Miwa mentions that she would like something like what Handa has in the back room, but he explains to them that that's a work in progress and that if he gets recognized at the exhibition, he'll be able to give it to them without any problem. But that now is not the time. When the girls mention that calligraphy is just a hobby for them, Handa switches into professional and dictatorial mode, insisting that he will teach them everything he knows about calligraphy. They spend the whole afternoon practicing, and when the girls complain about being tired, Handa pushes them even harder to keep practicing. Desperate, they asked him to go buy something to drink while they take a break, promising to continue when he gets back. While Handa is outside, Tama and Niwa start talking about Handa's intensity, commenting that with that level of seriousness, he'll never get a girlfriend unless he already has a long-distance one. Curious, they decide to snoop around his house and find a photo of Handa with Kawafuji and some other people, but no one seems to be his girlfriend. Naru, on her part, feels sad thinking that Handa might be married, but when he comes back, they realize that's not the case. On another occasion, the kids want to go to the beach. The mayor asks Handa to join them. Our main guy agrees, but then he finds out that it's also Hiroshi and the 2 teenage girls, which makes the task of watching teaching the kids not as easy as he expected. When they arrive at the beach, Handa worries about their safety, but everyone assures him that they're used to going by themselves. However, Handa, being a city boy, slips on the rocks and faints for quite a while. While Handa is unconscious, the kids are playing, Hiroshi is fishing, and the girls are keeping themselves entertained in their own way. Tama, who isn't used to spending so much time outdoors, collapses next to Handa, exhausted and with a flushed face. While they are alone, Tama asks Handa about Hiroshi, as she can't help but think about the two of them ever since she saw them together that time. Handa, misinterpreting the question, thinks that Tama likes Hiroshi and starts singing his praises, which only reinforces Tama's suspicions. Later, Handa decides it's time to leave, but suddenly he sees in the distance that Hiroshi, Niwa, and Nero are jumping from an extremely dangerous place. Seeing that Meru, the youngest, is about to jump, Handa panics and runs toward her, but he ends up slipping and hitting his head. Even though none of the kids get hurt, Handa scolds them severely for doing such dangerous things, and everyone feels bad for worrying him. Handa realizes that it's the first time he's really worried about someone else, since before coming to the island, he only cared about himself. Moved by his words, the kids run to hug him and apologize, promising not to do anything so dangerous again. While they're playing with Awa in the yard, Kawafurjit and Kusuk are trying to get in touch with Handa since they've arrived on the island, but Handa isn't answering his phone. Kawafuji and Kusuk arrive on the island and start looking for Handa when they run into Nero, who is selling seashells at a small port called Yuzin. When asked if she knows Handa, Nero replies that she doesn't, but she mentions that she knows a city guy who teaches calligraphy. Kawafuji, realizing that it's Handa, asks Nero to show them where he lives, but Nero, being the cheeky girl she is, says she'll only do it if they buy something from her stand. Kawafuji gives in and buys a conch shell, but when Nero gets excited and wants to show it to her grandmother, Kawafuji stops her, insisting that it's more important for her to show them the way. The situation gets tense when the island men start to surround the two strangers, suspicious of them because of their tattoos and for holding a girl by the arm. Worried that they might be criminals, the men decide to bring the matter up at the meeting that night, where they'll discuss whether Kawafu and Pusuk can be trusted or not. That night, while Handa, Hiroshi, and Nero are having a quiet dinner, Kawafu and Kusuk burst into the house, drunk after having a few drinks at the meeting. Kawafuji scolds Handa for not answering his messages, worrying about his well-being and reminding him how tough it is to live on an island. Handa explains that his cell phone broke when it fell into the sea, which calmed his friend's concern a little. Handa looks for food while Kusuk tells Miwi and Hiroshi he's Handa's biggest fan, inspired to study calligraphy by him. At 18, he beat Handa, shocking the teens who fear Handa's reaction. They delay Kusuk's. At 18, he beat Handa in a calligraphy contest, shocking the teens who fear Handa's reaction. They delay Kusuk's meeting with Handa until morning. Handa, however, already knows about Kusuk from Kawafuji's message. The next day, Kusuk visits Handa alone as Kawafuji is hungover and shows his collection of Handa's books, confessing he's his biggest fan. However, Handa surprises him by mentioning that he already knew who Kusuk was since Kawafuji had warned him in one of his messages. The next day, Kusuk visits Handa alone since Kawafuji is dealing with a hangover and excitedly shows him all the books he has about him, confessing that he is his biggest fan. Then he asks him to go back to Tokyo and seriously dedicate himself to calligraphy again. Kawafuji, Handa's friend and art seller, needs him to keep creating. Handa is near an epiphany but hasn't produced anything concrete. Kawafuji brought Kusuk to motivate. Since Handa arrived on the island, he seems to be on the verge of an epiphany, but he never quite manages to create anything concrete. That's why he brought Kusuk to the island, hoping he would become a rival who would push Handa to work harder nurture, grow, and most importantly, produce. Kusuk tells Handa that his calligraphy has become boring since he's been on the island, which triggers a new crisis for Handa. He reflects on how when he was doing good calligraphy, he didn't win any awards, but now that his work is being recognized, people say he's boring. As his thoughts sink, paper airplanes made from the pages of his magazines begin to rain down around him. Kusuk gets furious seeing that they're destroying his collection, but at that moment, Handa has a revelation. He tells Kusuk that beautiful calligraphy is what his father taught him, but now he's trying to discover his own style. That's why he decides to stay on the island until he figures out who he really is. Later, news that Handa is famous spreads all over the island, and all the locals start showing up at his house to ask for autographs. Kawafuji and Kusuk aren't exactly thrilled about spending their vacation on an island where there seems to be nothing interesting. However, they decide to adapt to the local life and join in on the community activities. On one of those days, they join the locals for a fishing trip. It quickly becomes clear that both of them are way too city folks and have no clue how to fish. On his part, Hiroshi, determined not to waste time with small fish, sets out in search of the Hisanewo, a species that, judging by Miwa's reaction, seems to be a big and difficult fish to catch. She wishes her good luck, knowing it's quite a challenge. Meanwhile, Miwa is busy teaching the city folks how to fish, which gets them excited knowing that the jacks they catch will be part of dinner. However, Kusuk, who isn't really into fishing, starts complaining that he would rather be practicing calligraphy with Handa, but Handa refuses, pointing out that every time they've practiced together, Kusuk ends up criticizing him and saying he's gotten worse. Kawafuji, upon hearing the harsh words Kusuk said to Handa, scolds him severely, and during the argument, it comes out that Kusuk has been going through a rough patch since he saw Handa's latest work. Handa insists that his work hasn't gotten worse, because if it had, he wouldn't have won any awards. The real reason behind Kusuk's comments is that he has let himself be too influenced by Handa's style. When Handa decided to change his style, Kusuk was left without an example to base his work on, which affected his own creations. Kawafuji takes the opportunity to talk about the importance of finding and developing your own style, instead of just copying others. At sunset, everyone gathers to see if Hiroshi has managed to catch Hisanibo. Although he wasn't lucky, Nara hands him a super hook she made herself, which, while it doesn't look very promising, is the only option they have. Against all odds, they manage to catch the Hisaniwo, but Nara's homemade hook breaks at the last moment, and the fish falls back into the water, causing everyone to burst out laughing. Handa tells Kusuk he's found joy and inspiration since arriving. Nara discovers Handa's project, a large painting using fish as a brush. Townspeople return to Tokyo. Kusuk admits that he's starting to feel the same way, and Neru, always curious, finds out that Handa's new project is a large calligraphic painting he made using fish as a brush. After 5 days on the island, it's time for the townspeople to head back to Tokyo. Before leaving, Kawafui tells Handa that he is glad to see him well and that his father told him about it. Handa, in a gesture that surprises Kawafui, explains that he no longer believes his father hates him. Instead, he now understands that his father got excited about him because he trusts in his potential. This revelation shows that Handa has moved past his rebellious attitude. Kusuk, for his part, apologizes to Handa for the things he said and thanks him for helping him broaden his horizons during the trip. Handa replies that it was also a positive experience getting to know him. As the plane carrying Kawafuji and Kusuk takes off, Hiroshi reflects on his last year on the island, knowing that at some point he will have to leave and face the world beyond his home. Thousand Hana reflects on Kawafuji's words about how the role of young people is to be pioneers and explore new horizons without fear of failure. Inspired, he decides to experiment with different objects to paint, like calligraphy brushes, spoons, and whatever else comes to mind. In the middle of his trials, Tama and Mila arrive to tell him that it's Nera's birthday and they want to buy her a cake, so they ask him for some money. Handa, considering suitable options, knows Nera makes typical gifts surprising. Recalling her love for insects, he plans a collection. He asks Kenta and friends to catch one. Remember that Neru is fascinated fascinated by insects, so he decides to give her a collection of them. He goes to Kenta and his friends with an insect net and asks Kenta to catch an insect for him. However, Kenta realizes Handa's plan and isn't willing to help him, since he wants to give Neru a huge sea of insects so she can be surrounded by them. So instead of collaborating, Kenta and his friends challenge Handa to a competition to see who can catch the most insects. Throughout the day, Handa struggles to catch insects because of his fear of them and the lack of a proper net. When they find a golden scarab, they call a truce to capture it, but Handa accidentally crushes it and they are left with nothing but to bury it. Despite this setback, Kenta gives one of his beetles to Handa, acknowledging his effort and the fact that he's been the only adult to play with them all summer, which he really appreciates. Handa finds everyone in his home with copy keys. He gives Neru a ticket to do anything. Neru values it more than any other present. When he walks in, he discovers the various and unusual gifts that each of them brought. He finally gives Neru a ticket that allows her to do anything she wants, even though everyone teases him for what they see as a cheap gift. But Neru is genuinely happy with it, as she values it more than any other present. On another day, Neru asks Handa to help her with the preparations for Obon, a celebration that's completely different from what he knows in the city. Obon is an important Japanese festival celebrated to honor the spirits of the ancestors. Handa is surprised to see the lanterns, the incense, and the rice being thrown during the celebration. What impresses her the most are the fireworks, and the men dressed in traditional outfits singing and dancing in front of the graves. Tama and Miwa chat happily about how much their teacher's attitude has improved, but Tama, like the rest of the town, knows that Handa is on the island as a punishment, and she wonders what will happen to him when he gets forgiven and can leave. During the festival, Handa realizes that although Neru's grandparents are always talked about, he has never met her parent. This is where Neru confesses to him that she's happy to be there because she's with Handa. This moment makes Handa realize that despite Neru's constant smile, she could also feel loneliness like anyone else, and he promises himself to be there for her for as long as she needs. So our protagonists stay a little longer, hanging out with their friends and celebrating with the spirits of their loved one. 2 weeks remain until the exhibition, and Handa is increasingly frustrated. Initial inspiration hasn't returned, worsening his work. His search for inspiration fails, and the water heater breaks. The guy remembers how in the first days he was on the island, he felt that spark of inspiration, but since then, it hasn't happened again. To make matters worse, the more frustrated he gets, the worse his work quality becomes. His search for inspiration isn't yielding any results, and when he decides to relax with a bath, he runs into another problem. The water heater is broken. The mayor suggests using a wood stove to heat the water, but when the protagonist asks where to get the wood, the mayor tells him that with a forest at his disposal, finding firewood will be a piece of cake. He just needs to go for a little walk. During the search, Handa mentions that he has no intention of looking for a girlfriend and that he'll probably end up alone. Meanwhile, Naruto and Miwa see Himo leaving Handa's house and assuming it is on fire, they become alarmed. Neru, who always keeps an eye on her grandpa's stove while she bathes, offers to watch Handa's stove while he takes a bath. Tama and Miwa join in and start teasing him, with Tama wanting to take a picture to use his body as a reference for her manga. Finally, Handa kicks everyone out of his house, and when he comes out of the bathroom, he runs into Hiroshi, who is there, cooking for him. Even though Handa tries to learn how to cook a simple dish, his cooking skills are practically non-existent. The two of them try each other's dishes, which isn't too positive for Hiroshi since Handa's dish is just pure cucumber, and it's terrible. Just then, Hina arrives crying, telling them that Neru is being bothered by some older boys. Hiroshi and Handa run to the spot and find out that the kids are using Neru as a jump rope. Despite his attempts to scare the kids with threats of calling the police, Handa's phone ends up in a pile of poop, so they come up with a new strategy. Instead of fighting, they'll play dodgeball. Handa and Hiroshi pretend to play with the kids and make them run around the older boys, hitting them with the ball. The situation escalates into a more conflicted side, and as much as we enjoy watching two adults take on a bunch of kids, this whole thing gets resolved unexpectedly when Aki shows up, and the older kids, upon seeing him, decide to leave and go play with him. With the problem solved, Handa decides to leave, but the kids ask him to play a little longer. Even though he agrees, the game involves using a hanging rope like Tarzan, which turns out to be way too dangerous. Handa tries to warn her about the risk, but Hina pushes everyone to jump. The rope snaps in midair, and everyone falls into the water, bumping into each other in the process, especially Handa, who gets a small cut on his head, but it heals quickly. At dusk, Handa returns home, reflecting on how he is wasting his time before the exhibition. As he watches the beautiful sunset, he feels a new spark of inspiration. However, as he rushes to get back home to take advantage of it, he trips and falls down a mountain. The kids turn around and see that their teacher is no longer with them, but instead of looking for him, they get offended that he took another path and head back home. That night, since he still hasn't come back, Neri tells Tama and Miwa that they're wondering what's going on in the middle of the woods. The main character is going through a double crisis. His inspiration is running low, and he's lost in the middle of the woods, exposed to countless dangers like little bugs and a caterpillar that's just too much for him. Out of fear, he trips and hurts his foot, leaving him unsure of what to do. He convinces himself that it's all over when suddenly he finds a key he had lost and realizes he's at the back of his house. Feeling calmer, the young man takes a moment to look at the sky and is amazed by the stars that blanket the heaven. He also sees some shooting stars, so he makes 2 wishes: that his bathroom gets fixed and that he's found alive. Tama and Miwa go to look for him and take him back home, while Handa reflects on the day's events and the inspiration he's desperately seeking. After creating what is probably his masterpiece called Star, Handa decides to let Kawafuji know that his time on the island, being in touch with nature, has given him a lot of inspiration and has helped him produce his best work so far, which he will send to him soon. Kawafuji meets the museum director, who asks about Handa's progress. He values Handa's talent and suggests forgiving him to help him return. The man asks Kago Fuji if Handa has improved, since despite everything, he recognizes his talent and the effort he is making to improve his work, which could be the best of his career one, a work that only he would be able to do, which is what he is most looking forward to. Seeing that the only way to get Handa to improve and come back home would be to make amends, the man tells Kawafuji that maybe it's time to forget the artist so he can return home, back on the island. Even though he has a new piece written, Handa hesitates to send it to Kabo Fuji because he's worried it might come off as unprofessional. Meanwhile, Neri's grandfather and another man are building a wall to protect the village from the approaching typhoon. Even though Handa would rather keep working on his calligraphy, he decides to help with the wall, recognizing that it's a more important task. Plus, the old man has taken Neri's card, which forces Handa to deal with this, so he has no choice. Even though Neri just wanted to play, the boy is able to help out since his organized personality allows him to arrange the stones neatly, making the wall not only practical but also aesthetically pleasing. Later, Neri's grandfather assigns Handa the task of transcribing the names of the donors for the wall construction. Handa approaches this task with great care, appreciating the chance to write something neat and different from his new calligraphy style. Additionally, the old man tells him that he can also write his name on the board, partly as a signature. Even though the main character replies that he shouldn't since he didn't donate, the old man says that will be their little secret. As he heads home to work on the board, the main character gets a phone call from Tokyo, so he goes to answer it while the kids are left alone. Neri tells her friends that she has a ton of activities planned with Handa, but she lost her chance when she lost the ticket. Her friends respond that ticket or not, they're still willing to join her. Handa answers Kawafuji's call, asking him to come back the next day instead of staying on the island for another week and a half. Then, the teacher looks at his students' work and tells them that they're more than ready to win first prize at the school exhibition, as under his guidance, they're light years ahead of their classmates. The girls, on the other hand, have some doubt, but he tells them that he's the one with doubts since they haven't responded about his design, and he's afraid it might not be good enough. So, the 3 of them let themselves get wrapped up in the darkness. Neri shows up and breaks the depressing vibe, inviting our main character to the city festival. Without telling anyone about his departure, Handa decides to enjoy his last day on the island and attend the festival that's happening. During the festival, Handa tries out the different games and reflects on how he had never attended one before due to his exclusive dedication to calligraphy and the influence of his parents, who forbade him from social activities and only allowed him to practice. This has been happening to him since he was a kid, and as an adult, Kamafuji also forced him to work instead of going out. There, he recognizes Iku, the nurse, an expert at the fish-catching game, and he's impressed by her skill. Then, Handa joins a basketball competition because Mio and the girls need a player since Tama has mysteriously disappeared. In reality, she's at the island's bookstore complaining to the owner about not getting the latest edition of her favorite manga. Their lack of sports skills causes the girls' team to lose the game, although they end up in second place. Despite his performance, Handa makes some money and decides to buy cotton candy for himself, Neru, and Hiro. He tries cotton candy for the first time and enjoys the experience. The fireworks are about to start, but the main character is in a panic when he realizes he's lost Neru, so he rushes out to look for her and runs into Tama, who is reading away from the crowd. Tama tells him that she saw Neru and goes with him to look for her, finding her on the beach with the rest of her friends. Later, while Handa is with Hiroshi, Tama, and Miwa, Hiroshi reveals that he will be moving to the city next year for work. Handa is about to confess that he has to leave the next day, but the fireworks start going off and he decides to stay silent. However, the kids sense what's going on, as even in his silence, Handa says it all. The next day, our main character locks up and leaves Yuzan, but later, Nera goes to Handa's house only to find it locked up, empty, with no signs of Handa or his belongings. Handa returns to Tokyo and meets Kawafuji, who sees his new calligraphy piece for the first time. The piece is large, chaotic, and beautiful, and Kawafuji comments that it has great economic potential since larger pieces sell better and for higher prices. Even though Handa is excited, he feels nervous about meeting the principal and doesn't know how to act after the history they share, since he hit him with his shoe. Handa starts a long speech about how the island managed to create that perfect piece, and he goes into a crisis thinking that in the city he won't be able to make something just as good. Just then, the principal walks into the room. Handa addresses him formally and is surprised to see the principal using a cane, having back problems, and he apologizes for the hit. The principal tells him that instead of giving a speech about ethics and morals, he has decided not to because Handa has learned on his own. Then he examines Handa's calligraphy. After taking more than 2 seconds to give his opinion, Handa gets nervous and insists that the piece is just a draft and that he'll give him the original later. The principal, however, tells him that even though it's a draft, he has captured in his character something he never imagined seeing in any other work. You can see the stars, the despair of being alone in the dark, a deep emotion in the characters. He claims it's worthy of a top spot in the exhibition, although he's not the only judge. Excited, the principal can't wait to see the real piece and leaves, leaving Handa completely desperate, since, as we know, that was the original piece, and now he has to pull something out of his pocket in less than a day, which makes him even more frantic. Later, the principal sees a car with Handa's dad and comments that sending Handa to the island was a good decision, although he still needs to improve a bit as a person and as an artist, since once again, they now have to deal with the fallout from his outbursts. Handa feels desperate, realizing that the principal expects more pieces from him. He practices intensely and decides to try recreating situations from the island to find inspiration for the new characters, but he has no luck. Kawafuji visits him, drawing. Kawafuji sees the exhibition as a rebirth step. Kawafuji, his manager and friend, calls islanders for help. That for him, this exhibition is the first step toward his rebirth. Kawafuji, who is not only the manager but also the best friend of our main character, is worried about him and has an idea, so he calls the people from the island, who offer him their full support. They scold him for leaving without saying goodbye, and Nera tells him that she misses the island and finds it boring without him. With renewed support and inspiration, Handa decides to write again, working all night and finally creating the pinnacle of his work, titled The Stone Wall. His friends, surprised, are left speechless by the final piece, which reflects the deep inspiration and experience Handa has gained during his time on the island. Back on the island, Tama and Miwa go to see the results of the school's calligraphy contest, convinced that both of them have won a gold ribbon. However, they find out that Tama took first place and Miwa won a silver ribbon, which bums her out since she doesn't know how she's going to explain it to her teacher when she gets back. On the island, the kids and teenagers are busy cleaning Handa's house, getting ready for his return, and Nera shouts to the heavens that she hopes he comes back. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Han's mother is trying to convince him to never return to that remote corner. However, now that his work has been sent to the museum, Handa is determined to return to the island once the exhibition is over. Despite his mom's objections, who is hitting him in frustration, things are about to get complicated when his parents and friends organize an intervention. Kawafuji, Kazuki, and his mom are all set on stopping him. Things are about to get complicated when his parents and friends organize an intervention. Kawafuji, Kazuki, and their mother are determined to stop him. The lack of electricity, internet, and Handa's completely changed lifestyle are their main concerns, and even Kawafuji, who was initially on his side, agrees with his mom since it's been proven that he can write just as well in the city as he can on the island. He explains that his experience showed him the island, with its minimal technology, is ideal for a reclusive artist like him, and he has grown to love it and its people. His mom points out this is a problem, as she sees he has changed since returning, blaming the people he met. His dad defends the island, recalling his own visit at Handa's age, finding it beautiful, which Handa didn't know. His dad insists he wouldn't have sent him there without knowing the place and people, and had asked his friend Kuro to watch over him. Handa doesn't know Kuro, but realizes he's the mayor. His dad replies that he would have never sent him there if he didn't know the place and the people who live there, and that he had already told his friend Kuro to look after him. Handa doesn't know who Kuro is, but then he realizes that he's talking about none other than the mayor. The main character's dad pulls out a photo album and reminisces about his youth on the island with his friends and how it changed him for the better. So, everyone is on board with the idea of a change of scenery, even though his mom remains firm in her stand. The rest agree with Handa's dad's arguments. He tells Handa that even though he forced him to go on his first visit, now it's time for him to decide for himself. If that helps him find inspiration, why shouldn't he do it? Handa does a logical analysis and concludes that the most sensible thing would be to stay in Tokyo. However, his heart tells him he needs to go back to the island. The decision is reinforced when he receives a box sent from the island, filled with toys, branches, food, and something even more special: the calligraphy works of his young apprentices. The impact of this box makes his mom change her mind, as she sees how much the island needs Handa, and she finally accepts that his place in the world is there. Finally, the main character's mom talks to his dad, and they both agree that not only has Handa's calligraphy improved, but so has his personality and how he cares for others. So, the two decide it's time to let him go and promise themselves that they'll travel to the island, which, with its magic, has changed their stubborn son through monumental effort and a lot of determination. A little bit of complaining about the cleaning, since after a while, the kids got bored and stopped tidying up to start playing. The kids and teenagers finish getting the house ready just in time for Han's arrival. As he returns to the island, our main character travels the same path as the first time, but this time, the surroundings seem incredibly beautiful and serene to him. Meanwhile, in the big city, his work is about to be evaluated by a group of experts. The return is full of surprises, as his friends have thrown a surprise party to celebrate him, but they find out that he actually didn't win first place, so they're worried he might have another one of his dark episodes and ruin the party for everyone. So, his friends ask him anxiously about the exhibition, and Handa, with a smile, tells them that it went pretty well. Even though he came in 5th place, his perspective has changed, and the first place doesn't matter to him as much anymore. In Tokyo, the main character's parents find out about the 5th place and attribute it to the fact that the older artists prefer to give the younger ones more time so they don't get too full of themselves. Additionally, Kawafui tells the main character's dad that for some reason, Handa didn't take the news badly, which shows just how much he has changed. When asked about the characters he wrote, Handa reveals that they are the most important ones in his life, without giving any more details. In the end, the truth comes to light, as the piece he presented at the exhibition is a tribute to his friends from the island, with their names lovingly engraved. Finally, our main character talks to Neru, and they both agree that even though a lot has happened, it's always more fun when they're together.